Welcome to Real Leaders with Roshini, the podcast with real talk, real questions, real insight, and we hope real inspiration for real. In Season 2, we meet more inspiring leaders who get real in all parts of their lives. You can find Real Leaders with Roshini on the radio.com app, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Google Play. My guest is Sri Zaheer, Dean of the Carlson School of Management at the University of Minnesota. We speak today virtually and not in person as the United States and the world deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. Many states, including Minnesota, are living under stay-at-home orders. So let's start there. We are in an unprecedented time. You have said in the past, the only thing that's predictable is unpredictability.
Well, Roshini, thank you for having me. And yes, I truly believe that. I mean, things happen and you have to be resilient. You have to sort of work your way through it. You have to sometimes pivot on a dime. I mean, qualities like resilience and agility are so important today.
How do you feel you're bringing that to your students, your staff, and the university community?
Well, it's quite amazing, really. I mean, universities are typically considered slow-moving animals. They've been around forever and they've barely changed. That's what we're accused of anyway. And it's amazing that in the space of 4 working days, just at the Carlson School, we managed to take some 200 courses and 300 sections that had never been online before online. And we managed to train our faculty, we managed to train our students, our staff were just amazing. I mean, the pivot that's been accomplished, I would never have predicted that it could happen as quickly and as efficiently as it did.
Congratulations to you and your team for being able to do that. Speaking of unpredictability, you probably couldn't have predicted that this little girl from West Bengal, India, would one day be the dean of a major U.S. business school.
Absolutely not. I had no idea. I didn't know what a business school was. I didn't know what a dean was. Even much later, for that matter. I've had a very jungle gym kind of career. It's been going, sometimes sideways, sometimes downwards. But every time there was, as I said, it's the unpredictability of your careers. Careers are long. I think resilience, being curious, being open to opportunity is always kind of helpful.
You were sort of an unusual young girl in India in that you had a father who was really pushing you to experiment and even suggested you go to business school.
Yes, I was all set to be a physicist and, I liked the sciences. I was doing my undergrad in physics at that point, and my dad happened to meet some kid who was actually the son of a friend of his who'd just done this brand new thing called the MBA. And he came home very excited and he said, there's this new business school which has been started by Harvard Business School, and it's I have this friend's son who just graduated from there, and his starting salary was higher than what I retired at.
Wow.
And so he was very excited about that. And he just looked at me and he said, it's a tough exam and interview, but you can do it. And I have to say that, that vote of confidence was very, very helpful. I had no idea what business was. But because my dad said I could do it, I said, let's give it a try.
I want to talk about your dad for a little bit. Often, young girls and young women, if they have a strong father in their life, that really becomes such a motivator for the rest of their life. I understand he was a chemist and innovator, and you call him a risk taker.
Absolutely. I mean, he would, he did things like, there was one occasion my mother tells me the story that he had just come back from the war in Burma. He'd walked back and he didn't have a job, and they had my brother was at that point I think 2 years old or something, and my mom and dad and he just decided, okay, there must be jobs in Calcutta, so let's go there. Gets on a train, goes to Calcutta. He has some tiny amount of money in his pocket, the equivalent I would say about $10. And that gets stolen. He gets pickpocketed.
Wow.
On his way to try and find a place to rent. But he pushes through all that. Somehow he finds a job. And my mother's comment always was that you know what? Through all that, he slept well at night. He never, never missed a night's sleep. And I loved that attitude, that we can make this work. It was a kind of a can-do kind of approach to life, which has kind of stayed with me as well.
It sounds like he was super resilient.
Yes, I think he definitely. I think that was very much a quality that I'd associate with him, and I hope I have some of it.
Life eventually took you to Nigeria for your husband's job, and you became a business journalist. Was that unexpected, or was the job you could find at the time?
No, I had started writing a little bit for Business International when I was still an internal auditor in India. I was a manager in India, and I was doing a little bit of side writing just for fun. And then when I went to Nigeria, they asked me if I would be a more sort of take it on more seriously, because they had never done, they used to produce these intelligence reports on countries, and they hadn't done one in Nigeria. So they sort of set me up as a consultant to try and write the very first intelligence report on Nigeria. It's, the Business International later on became The Economist. So it was The Economist Intelligence Unit reports on countries that you may have seen.
Absolutely.
And so this was, so that was the first time it had ever been written on Nigeria. And that was just very interesting for me. I mean, it got me into writing. It got me into sort of a little bit of research as well. So it sort of paved the way for, I think, a future academic career.
Let's talk about that a little bit. You mentioned pivoting earlier, and people in general, if you don't get that art of pivoting down or accept that it could happen to you, you could end up in a bad place mentally, monetarily. How did you pivot into academia from this Business International job?
Well, it was, as you mentioned, my husband had moved to Nigeria because he got a good job that he couldn't refuse. And I was at that time flying high as an internal auditor in a multinational company in India, Sandoz. And they tried to post me to Nigeria, but they really couldn't. And so I just took a vacation, went there, and looking for a job. And someone said, oh, by the way, there's this new university in town. So I was already writing for Business International. I knew I could do something in Nigeria. But I went and dropped in and, gave them my resume. And of course, it was kind of strange. I mean, I walk into the dean's office, I hand them my resume, and he said, call me, my number is here. I don't know if you have a job, but I'm here, so call me. And the dean's secretary just asked me to wait and calls me in, and I didn't realize it was an interview. So I was in jeans, but so I walked in anyway. And the dean just looks up from my resume and says, when can you start?
Wow.
It was quite funny, yeah.
It's nice to hear that story because you might look at that as luck. It was really great timing, but also being inquisitive and exploring on your side.
Right, exactly. And being willing to try something out. I'd never traveled out of India, so there was that curiosity element of what is Nigeria going to be like. And I loved it. I loved the teaching. The students were just phenomenal. And it made me realize that, that I really liked the academic life much more than I did corporate life, and set me on a completely different path. So I think it's being open to opportunity, being curious, willing to sort of pivot, as you said. It's, all of those things have been very helpful.
And then eventually you did get your PhD at MIT. You came to the University of Minnesota in 1992 to teach and have had a nearly 30-year career at the University of Minnesota. What is it about the place, and specifically the Carlson School, that has really kept you in one place?
We came here not knowing very much about Minnesota or the Carlson School or the university. And what we found was an absolute gem of a place. It was a place where, the faculty were just so open to new ideas. As a young researcher, I would sometimes, if I had a question about some methods that I needed to use, I could just walk into a senior faculty member's office and know that they would be very, very willing to help. So it was this very vibrant intellectual atmosphere. The students were fantastic, having the local business community so that you could actually go, and talk to them as you were doing your research. You could bring them into your classroom as you taught. that was such an added attraction. And the cities themselves, I mean, the culture, my husband and I, we love the opera, we love the orchestra, we love theater. So all of that, it just is such a perfect place to be. I have no regrets at all.
You mentioned your husband. What is it like being your husband? I mean, what is he like?
Well, I think you'll have to ask him at some point, but what it's like to be, my husband. But he's an extremely accomplished scholar in his own right, which lets me off the hook. He's a very popular teacher. He's a fantastic researcher. He's a, deputy dean of the Fellows of the Strategic Management Society. So he's got his own niche. He's got his own areas of, excellence. And so, we compete and we don't compete. We are, it's just great to have this kind of supportive person who understands what you do, but isn't necessarily in this exactly the same space.
Sounds like you're each other's biggest cheerleaders.
Also, our biggest critics.
Well, you're South Asian, so that sort of comes with the territory for your loved ones. People would be interested in the things you have done and want to do as Dean of the Carlson School of Business at the University of Minnesota, a role you got in 2012. You also launched the Military Veterans Initiative, and now the Carlson School is the #1 military-friendly business school in the United States. Why was it so important for you to bring veterans into this mix?
I just felt it was the right thing to do at that particular time. And we had two of our alumni who were very supportive of the Veterans Initiative. And so it's in terms of raising some money for it. And it just felt like the right thing at that time because there were a lot of veterans coming back from the Middle East, from Afghanistan, from Iraq, and they needed to find a way to, get into civilian life. And how did they take their military experiences and make them sort of comprehensible to a business audience? And this is what we wanted to help them do, and that's why we kind of got into it. It's become an extremely successful program. I think it's not just about recruiting veterans, but it's about supporting them with academic sort of internships. There, we're doing all kinds of things for them. And there's a very successful club that they're with. They have mentors. So it's actually turned out to be a really strong program. Very proud of it.
It seems that you're ahead of your time because all the rage lately is what can businesses do for veterans. You have been doing that and educating them for a long time. It's great that you took that initial interest. Dean Zaheer, in a lot of write-ups about you, I see two themes that often come up. One, global mindset, and two, the power of listening.
I think that's fair enough. I mean, I think the global mindset, I personally have lived on multiple continents. I've lived in Asia, lived in Africa, of course in the US for the longest time. This is now home. But I've also, been on mini sabbaticals in France and in Italy, so lived in Europe. And each time there's so much to learn. I mean, I find it fascinating about, how people are essentially the same, but there are just so many interesting differences that make life enjoyable, actually, as you go from continent to continent. And I think this is something we're so interconnected, and we know that even today with nature in some sense knows no borders, whether it's climate change, whether it's pandemics, nature knows no borders at all. And I think as human beings, we have to be sensitive to what people in other parts of the world, what their needs are, and how we can work with them and collaborate with them and learn from them as we go forward.
Learning from them and listening to them. You have said if you want to influence action, you have to involve the actors in coming up with solutions.
Right. I think that's extremely important. And I think as a dean, I sort of end up doing that every day. All of the great things that we've done at the school, whether it's the Veterans Initiative, whether it's the new master's programs we've introduced, they've all really been, initiatives that have other champions. And I just listen to their ideas and help them, figure out how to make them happen. And that I see that as my role, connecting dots, helping execute, interesting ideas. And that's that listening part is extremely important in any leadership role.
One thing I was really surprised to learn about you is that you're a boxer. Tell us about that.
Well, I enjoy boxing. It's a quick workout. It's a total workout. It helps with balance. It helps with agility. It helps with strength and flexibility, and and it gets your frustrations out.
When did you get into it?
I want to say about in 2008, 2009, I started working out with a trainer, at that time, and he got me into boxing. I've got a bag at home, and gloves and all the rest of it. So,
Dean Zaheer, what are some of the lessons from boxing that we can apply to life?
Lessons from boxing to life. Okay, I think, it's focus. It's really being in the moment. When you're boxing, you're not thinking about anything else. I think that's very much a feature there. The flexibility, the agility, the sort of the constant, the willingness, to just kind of move. Maybe it's again pivot and, being able to pivot, being agile, being resilient, all of those things, I think, come out when you're boxing.
I love it. Certainly, we hope you stay at the Carlson School of Management for a long time. But when you do go, what do you hope they say about you?
It's interesting. I mean, people talk about legacy and things. I think legacy emerges. I don't know. I don't think you can ever plan legacy. And I believe that, if I've left the school in a better place than I found it, that's the best legacy that I can hope for. That our students have the best, really transformational experiences when they're here. That our faculty are able to do interesting work that has an impact on business. That our business community learns from us and is able to help us, and that we're work very collaboratively with them and with the rest of the university. I think these are legacies that I think these are the kinds of things that I hope are there, and collectively that'll be the legacy.
That sounds fabulous. I have no doubt you will leave it better than when you found it. Thanks much, Dean Sri Zaheer, for joining us today. You are just a delight.
Well, thank you, Roshini. It was an absolute joy to be on this program.
Until next time, keep it real.